Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, March 21st, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, and for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, John Washington, journalist and author of The Case for Open Borders. And later in the show, Christoph Vogel, award-winning researcher of Central Africa, will be with us to discuss the roots of the horrific violence in Congo. Also on the show today, the U.S. finally calls for an immediate ceasefire in a UN Security Council draft as deliberate famine is imposed upon Gaza, and the IDF continues attacking Al-Shifa Hospital, a war crime. U.S. officials tell the Israeli press that they're working on viable alternatives to attacking Rafah as Israel works to create a puppet government in Gaza. Netanyahu addressed Senate Republicans virtually yesterday, outraged over Schumer's call for his ouster. I bet he is. Good. Enjoy it. Negotiators have a deal to hopefully avert a government shutdown, the deadline Saturday. The House Freedom Caucus is still pissed off, even though the deal seemingly has very few wins for Democrats and lots of wins for the right. Increased border and military funding and a prohibition on UNRWA funding for a year. Bernie Sanders and AOC to relaunch a Green New Deal for housing initiative today, centering clean energy improvements and public housing, which is great. Biden announces new tailpipe rules for vehicles, aiming to accelerate the EV transition, as well as $6 billion more in student loan cancellations, this time for 78,000 borrowers in public service jobs. Experts say Trump may need to declare bankruptcy. He's done it before. But the Donald is worried that may make me look bad. I'm the rich guy, remember? Julian Assange is reportedly exploring a plea deal which would allow him to admit to a misdemeanor. It's actually good news that the DOJ and the U.S. is considering.
We'll see about what it means larger.
After 15 months of zero evidence, the Republicans begin to pump the brakes on the Biden impeachment inquiry. The DOJ is expected to sue Apple for antitrust violations today. Bolsonaro indicted for falsifying his COVID vaccination records. And lastly, AMLO slams Texas's anti-immigrant SB 4 law as dehumanizing and says Mexico will not accept the state's deportations as the legal battle between Greg Abbott and Biden continues. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. I am here with my friends, my colleagues, Matt and Bradley. Hello to them both, and hello to you. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. We're all here today, except for, well, no, Sam's not here, obviously, but in the fun half, we'll be joined by Matt Binder and Brandon Sutton, and we're going to have a lot of fun in that fun half. And then also, we'll have Chris Albrecht later calling in about East Palestine and the demands for healthcare for those affected by the spill. I guess that was last year in Ohio. So he'll be calling in to give us some insight into what's happening and the event that's being organized surrounding that. But I just wanted to touch on this quickly. I mentioned this in headlines about how this budget deal that the details are still trickling out about has very little wins for progressives, for the left, despite the fact that the Democrats control the Senate and the presidency. It's a little bit undercut when the Democratic administration admits that they also want border militancy and more funding for our military-industrial complex. CNN's Manu Raju put this Twitter thread up here, and these are kind of like what, because I guess this negotiation was happening late into the night last night, and this is what the Democrats are touting for their wins. $1 billion increase for childcare and Head Start, funding for cancer and Alzheimer's research. No Republican, so like rejecting Republican cuts here. I mean, it means Republicans didn't get this, but that I don't understand how that's something they gained. It's interesting framing here. So teachers' jobs are not cut, which Republicans wanted. Republicans didn't get limits on reproductive health. There are 12,000 more special immigrant visas for Afghans. That's good. And $1 billion in climate change and resilience activities for the DoD. Okay, so
climate change preparation through the Pentagon.
Exactly. But I mean, so that's it? Maybe we'll hear more, but that was what Congressman DeLauro put out there. But for the Republicans, this is what Mike Johnson had to say about what they achieved. An increase in funding for the Department of Homeland Security for border security and enforcement. Increases ICE detention bed capacity. Funds more border patrol agents, the highest level ever funded. Cuts 20% of funding for NGOs. Increases Department of Defense spending. Overdue pay raises for the troops. I'm glad the troops are getting paid more. Although there's a lot of evidence to show that, so much waste in the Pentagon could be reallocated to paying our troops a ton more. We could be paying the troops a ton more and giving them better health care. But instead that goes to, contracts to Lockheed Martin and things like that. Prohibits funding for the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Reaffirms our commitment to Israel by funding an annual security commitment of $3.3 billion, basically saying, don't worry, Israel, we'll continue funding you.
Help in this genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. That's our annual contribution to them, just saying, I know we've been touting, hoping for $14 billion more for you to continue your genocide. Biden is slow walking that at this point, and the Democrats seem to be kind of putting the brakes. But don't worry, you'll still get your annual dole from us. And if we could just put that back up again, because I can't see this bottom part here. Only allows for the American flag and official. Okay, this is stupid. But go to the second page here, because there are 2 pages of what the Republicans are touting. Cuts 6% of overall foreign aid funds, including enhanced and new conditions on assistance to organizations like the UN. Eliminates funds to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, until March of 2025, until the budget is discussed again. Rescinds $20 billion from Biden's enhanced IRS expansion enforcement, meaning like that was the money that was supposed to be used to go after wealthy people who cheat on their taxes. Am I crazy here? Or do these budgetary items seem much more tilted towards the Republican side than the Democratic side? Am I insane? Because let's go back. I put what apparently the Democrats are happy about up again. I'm happy we're researching cancer. I'm happy.
$120 million. That's like half a baseball player.
Exactly right. So Shohei Ohtani's going to make that in 3 years if he's not suspended for gambling, and that's a whole other story. That is astounding to me. And the deadline is midnight, basically, 11:59 p.m. on Friday, so that's tomorrow. And there's not going to be an opportunity for a lot of people to read this, or there will be no opportunity, I imagine, to add anything of substance to this. So this is a right-wing.
This is a mass murder
concession,
bro.
Yeah,
the
and then that
stuff
too,
is,
right?
Mass murder. And entire America's like as complicit as Israel. This is not just Israel doing something and we can't control it. This is affirmatively saying, Gazans, we're starving you along with Israel.
A reminder that because the Palestinian people have been under occupation for decades and do not have sovereignty and the ability to have their own state and their own infrastructure and resources, UNRWA within Gaza has been the way that education and healthcare and medicine is distributed. It's basically their societal infrastructure, a significant portion of it. And without UNRWA funding, you're enabling the mass starvation of Palestinians as we try to airdrop aid in a fraction of what is needed.
It's a joke.
It's a joke. And we're building a temporary port near Gaza to get aid in when it's the question is, I saw this quote actually in Mother Jones. It was from, I saw this yesterday, and it was a really, really good one from the former ambassador to, I think it was Algeria and Syria, last name Ford. Can't find the quote here, but essentially he was saying that this is the biggest humiliation of the United States by Israel that could possibly,
but we can't think
he could
about
possibly
it like that
imagine.
Anymore. We're doing
that's
it with
his.
them.
I agree.
Yeah.
But the point is just like the idea that the United States is so infrastructurally and indelibly connected through our systems of weapons and through our foreign policy to maintaining this settler colonial apartheid state to the point that they can flip us off and say, we're going to keep humiliating Biden to his base that is furious at him right now by by slow walking aid, not allowing it in. Chris Van Hollen went there and saw it with his own eyes. Not allowing aid through by land the most efficient way and enabling the starvation of them to death. And then this budget, and this budget is no, but this budget explicitly says, no, we actually kind of want that anyway.
Which is like, let's just make it clear. This, like, again, all this talk about Biden being embarrassed, and no, this is policy of the American government.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of right there, which is that. Here we go. This is the quote. Thanks, Bradley. Right. If Israel were letting in enough aid, the United States would not be airdropping food into Gaza and building a temporary port in Gaza. Ford has called the airdrops the greatest humiliation of the United States by Israel he has ever seen. He is struck by the fact that the U.S. is acting as if it is trying to get supplies into besieged people surrounded by an enemy of the United States.
I mean, what we would do in that case is bomb the IDF, which is what we should be doing if they're starving people intentionally. And instead, we're actually just backing them up with policy.
I mean, at the very least, we should we should be not funding them. We should be removing our diplomatic cover for them. But it's
not like again, like even like they're stopping aid. They're stopping food. They're stopping water to getting into people. This is like the sickest thing I've ever seen in my life.
It is. It is. Absolutely. And we have learned no lessons from the genocides of before
No, we're having hypothetical conversations about maybe a transfer could be peaceful under the right circumstances with complete dilettantes.
Yeah, it's deeply sick. So this is probably the budget. This is probably what's going to go through because there will be sufficient numbers of Democrats in the House to get it over the finish line, even with the Freedom Caucus and progressives.
I just remembered this segment wasn't supposed to be about Gaza.
I know. I tried to bring it home here, but look, if this is not on your mind,
that's the context. That's the context.
That's
all
the
this
context.
is happening. We're doing a genocide with Israel.
Yes, that is the context of our. I can't imagine a more urgent conversation about politics, and it's way more important than electoralism.
And just we have two conservative
political parties
Yes.
where one in their budget priorities is saying like, oh, Head Start, like, which I'm not even saying this stuff isn't important, but it's like one is
peanuts.
But one is a single page for like peanuts, as Matt alluded to, like literally like baseball contract money for certain priorities, and the other one is saying we hoorah, we just banned a UN relief agency from getting funding from us,
and now we'll also be blocking migrants from coming and increasing militancy so they die along our borders as
Mission
well.
accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
We're in the midst of a fascist slide, and the election of Biden in 2020 slowed it maybe a few percentage points, but we're looking at a very dark century ahead if things don't straighten out.
Yeah, yep, that's exactly right. But on the other hand, perhaps if we elect Trump for a second time, we will get a socialist president next time, because that's what I was told by some idiots online would be the result of Trump winning in 2016, that the next Democratic president would be Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren was a specific mention by
some people, yes, but even someone to the left of that. No, that's not how this works. As horrific as Biden is, accelerationism is not the answer. However, this is a deeply, deeply depressing kind of indication of the state of American politics right now. Before we get to our conversation with John Washington, which is actually quite relevant given that border provision and the increase in funding for a border patrol, we have a word from one of our favorite sponsors, EarthBreeze. EarthBreeze Eco Sheets, they look just like a dryer sheet, but it's not a dryer sheet. It's just that light. It's just that convenient. It's ultra concentrated liquidless laundry detergent. It is the best of all worlds. EarthBreeze is tough on stains and odors while being kind to the planet and your skin. And EarthBreeze has a deal for you right now. You can subscribe to EarthBreeze and save 40% off. Go to earthbreeze.com/majority to get started. We would like to thank EarthBreeze for supporting our show. EarthBreeze Eco Sheets are dermatologist tested, hypoallergenic, and free of bleach, dyes, and parabens. There's also a fragrance-free option for someone like Sam, who once got upset when I first started working here and I wore perfume into the office. Some people just can't handle that. I know now to go perfume-less into the office. If you don't like those kinds of scents, that's an option for you. But if you like scents like me, there's a fragrance option as well. But if you have sensitive skin too, it's really important not to go for like these chemically options, and EarthBreeze is not that. EarthBreeze got rid of unnecessary chemicals for a formula that is kind to sensitive skin of all ages, including babies. EarthBreeze offers flexible subscriptions delivered via carbon offset, shipping right to your door for free. Because unfortunately, you'll never run out of laundry, but now you'll also never run out of detergent. You should give it a try, and if you decide to go back to your old stuff for some reason, you get a full refund on your EarthBreeze purchase, no questions asked. These are just like these small sheets, like thinner than paper, really, really thin, that you can store easily, and I am dying for more storage in my apartment. This has saved a ton of storage for me. Those massive detergent jugs full of plastic, we need to reduce our plastic. Single-use plastic is just like killing this planet and our ecosystems. 500 million detergent jugs ended up in landfills and oceans every single year. Make a positive impact in the world if you can, and it doesn't have to come as a cost to you. My clothes, they're clean. I think I smell pretty good, guys. I don't smell bad in the office.
No, they really smell, yeah.
Okay, there we go. And I feel like I actually did something good just by doing my laundry. Right now, my listeners can receive 40% off EarthBreeze just by going to earthbreeze.com/majority. That's earthbreeze.com/majority to cut out single-use plastic in your laundry room and claim 40% off your subscription. earthbreeze.com/majority. Thank you to EarthBreeze for sponsoring our show. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking to John Washington. We are back, and we are joined now by John Washington, staff writer at Arizona Luminaria, contributor for The Intercept, journalist, author of The Case for Open Borders. You can also find him on Substack at Lit and Border News. John, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I love a good deliberately provocative title. It's right up my alley here, because we keep hearing about this crisis on the border, and we just opened the show talking about the what's in the budget agreement, and there are a lot of right-wing concessions for border militancy, increased funding for border patrol agents, the ability to hire more border patrol agents. And it appears that a majority of members of Congress, including the Democratic president himself, have conceded basically the entire point to the right on how there's a crisis at the border. I mean, what's your reaction to this current political moment and how there is this seemingly bipartisan consensus in D.C. about the border being this massive problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think just watching it, it seems like they have acquiesced or conceded to so much. I'm talking about the left or the Democratic left, that their strategy at this point, I struggle to find a better way to describe it than just lying down and playing dead. Like, what are they standing for? I don't really know. What's I think particularly frustrating about this is that they've tried this tactic before, and it didn't work before, and it's not working now. I mean, we saw in 2013, the Democrats try to concede as much as possible. This is during the Obama administration, to the right, supposedly to gain political capital so they could pass a major reform bill, and it didn't happen. We saw it again early this year. This long debated, bipartisan or tripartisan, if you count Kristen Sinema from Arizona, where I am, Senate bill, and they gave away, basically they just forgot about their principles and gave away all this to the right, and it didn't pass. And all of a sudden, like a month later, during the State of the Union, Biden was trying to play the same move again. It's like, wait, why are you not learning at this point?
Yeah, for this potential hypothetical electoral victory to show that the Republicans are unreasonable, as if that has ever worked. And we've done this many, many times before in different contexts, just not on the border really as much as this current moment.
Yeah, and another thing here that I think is worth pointing out is that despite all these concessions that you're rightly pointing out, they're also playing this other role in which they seem to be, or they're at least rhetorically taking the stance that they are working against the most upsetting or most anti-immigrant policies coming out of, for example, Texas. And I think that is a bad framing. They are not on opposite sides of this issue. They are, I think Texas is picking a fight with them, and they're standing up, but really only in a rhetorical way. They're really only posturing. And, even we saw them condemn, and they are trying to defend in court their ability to enforce immigration policies. But really, when it comes down to it, the policies aren't that dissimilar. These are policies that we have seen the federal government, even the Biden administration, really embrace in their very recent past. And now they're pitting themselves politically as if they're against Texas. And it's just these are not people on two sides of the issue. These are people very much on one extreme side of the issue that are having their little quibbles on that very edge of the conversation. Even Mexico, the Mexican government came out with a statement against when for a brief moment yesterday, or was this 2 days ago now, the Texas law was able to be enforced. The Mexican government said, this is anti-Christian. This is something that is against our principles. It's like, wait a minute. You have been doing the dirty work of the United States immigration enforcement regime for years. You've been ramping up that dirty work. And all of a sudden, this Texas law takes effect and you're taking a stance on it. It's really, you're seeing politicians speak out of both sides of the mouth at the same time and really not take an actual stand on principle, which is one of the major points of the book. It's where are we? What do we stand for?
No. There's so much great stuff in your book and so much excellent context, but I have to ask you to expand on that point about Mexico, because I headlined AMLO's statements there, the kind of criticism of Texas's law, but you seem to be kind of hinting at the fact that there's some hollowness there. What is the context of Mexico's role in maintaining United States border militancy?
Oh, this is something we have seen being ramped up for a long time. And, similar to this idea of like taking a posture against some of this more draconian enforcement measures, they really are also implementing them. So they can posture against them, but they are implementing them. And I'll talk about how is that the Mexican government has been engaged in more deportations than we've seen in many years. They are implementing more enforcement zones along their southern border. They are denying asylum claims at a very high rate. They've also seen more asylum claims than they've seen in history in this past couple of years. And then the creation of this rebranded military outfit, the National Guard, which was something that AMLO did soon after taking office. This was one of his major, supposedly, security reform projects. And yet, really, they're just giving the same people different uniforms. And there was some ousting of some of the chopping off heads of some of the top officials. But really, we're seeing much of the same things. And we're seeing just absolutely brutal the detainment of migrants by law enforcement officials in Mexico, both local and these National Guard officials. We're seeing kidnappings. We're seeing them colluding with some of the human smuggling gangs. And this is just a continuation of much of what we've decried, and even the Mexican government has decried for a long time, but it's just still happening, just being talked about in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of maintenance and expansion without much opposition, and an alternative vision for what this could look like, which is what your book provides. So I guess let's dive into that here. This concept of borders and how it's amazing to me. Of course, we're constantly thinking about like Israel right now and Gaza, and just how people can so quickly treat these political structures that we've decided on as something that just came out of nature. I mean, Biden's older than the state of Israel, but we have to talk about Israel as this incredibly important thing to maintain. ICE was created after 9/11, and AOC is apparently radical for when she ran on abolishing ICE, right? And a lot of members of the squad. But that's not radical, because we're just looking back a few decades at this point. And what your book talks about is how border walls and these detention centers and closed borders in this way are a relatively new phenomenon. Can you talk about the history of militarized borders and how it rapidly has kind of escalated over the past 6 or 7 decades?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways you can look at this. In the year 2000, shortly before 9/11, there were about 15 militarized border walls throughout the world. Today, there's just under 80. So we have seen an incredible explosion of border enforcement throughout the world. And that number is still rising. There's more being planned. You mentioned ICE. ICE has only been around since 2003. For 95% of our country's history, we had no ICE. And there's a lot of people who say things like, without a border, you can't have a country, or without this sort of intense enforcement regime, we wouldn't be able to maintain the status quo of the country. But this is all very new. We had effectively no real border infrastructure like walls or fences before the 1990s. There was some that started in the 80s, but really what we see today is over 700 miles of wall, about 20,000, a little under 20,000 border patrol officials. None of that was around that. I mean, it was like incomparable. And yet, things seemed, were far from perfect, and there's plenty of suffering along the border, and there's a lot of people who had more difficulties crossing than others, and sometimes it was really bad, but nothing like what we're seeing today. In fact, for the first 100+ years of our country's history, there was 0 federal immigration laws on the books, 0. So it's possible. Abolish ICE is something that we don't have to go that far back in our history to see that we could exist without it. And yet, I think that people sort of fall into this trap of the status quo, or the status quo bias, where exactly as you're saying, like all of a sudden it seems unimaginable or like anathema to what a country is to see beyond these walls. But we also have lots of examples throughout the world of places where there are no walls, or where there is effectively open immigration. Of course, the EU is probably the first thing that comes to mind. And there's a lot of fears, especially in Western Europe, about what would happen if they opened up this passport-free zone. And none of those fears were realized. My own family comes from Romania, from Eastern Europe. That was one of the later countries that was tacked onto this free passport zone. A lot of people were like, all the Romanians are going to come to Spain or France, and we're really nervous about it. And yet that didn't happen. Actually, a lot of the migration from Eastern Europe to Western Europe stayed the same, or even slowed down to some degree. So there's I think a lot of fear that is not really warranted about what could happen or what things could look like. There's also all of this seemingly amnesia of what things looked like before. And there's another, I think, really important thing here is when people advocate for walls, at least the status quo, or maybe even more walls or more miles of walls or higher walls or whatever, blacker walls like Trump wants to paint them black, or dig moats around the country as well. One thing that is often left out of the conversation is how ineffective they are. They really don't work very well, or they don't work to do what they're purported to do. People have always migrated. They're migrating now, and they will migrate in the future. I think the real question is not how to stop them, because we can't, and we can get into that a little bit, but how do we respond to people moving? And I think if you sort of just change the framing on that question a little bit, I think it brings up a little bit more of understanding and the humanity that's involved in the issue. It's okay, it's inevitable that people are going to come. So do we want to give them the boot, or make their lives miserable, or break apart their families and try to excommunicate them? Or can we say we can't stop them, so maybe we can make it better for all of us? And there's a lot that we could talk about there too, about how migration is a huge boon for all.
For all, yes. And the fact that we can't stop them is in part due to the fact that there has been an escalation in displacement, in part due to, I want to get to the United States in a second, and we can talk about how U.S. policy in Latin and South America results in the displacement, but you mentioned Europe there. And it is notable, because within the EU, right, there's very free movement country to country, and you can go for a weekend to another country by train. But for some of these countries that now have far-right governments, I mean, Giorgia Meloni comes to mind in Italy, they are obsessed with preventing certain kinds of people from entering the country. Migrants, coming across the sea, Meloni has been defunding these kind of NGO organizations that are responsible for rescuing them, to just force them to drown. So can you talk about that very obvious incongruence where, hey, other people who kind of look like us from other European countries can freely come and visit, but if we're having migration from African countries or Middle Eastern countries, time for them to drown in the ocean? Right.
Yeah, it's worse than incongruence. You're right. It is also that, but it's blatant hypocrisy and racism.
Yes.
Take Italy as an example, and it's a really telling example. For well over a century, Italy was a country of huge emigration. Many, many Italians left, primarily to the United States. Look at Germany as well. Germany, especially in the late 19th century and into the early 20th century, was a place that was sending a lot of people to different countries. Again, mostly the United States, but many other places as well. And a lot of them were not met with open arms. They were reviled. They were, slurred. They were, slurs were cast on them. They were trying to push back, and yet Italians, they were, crying foul about their treatment, and yet they didn't stop leaving because of poverty, because of war, because of all sorts of things. And now the tables have turned a little bit. Southern Europe has become a place not of emigration as much as immigration, though many Italians, people born in Italy, are still living outside of the country. Same with Germans. There's, many millions of German people who were born in Germany are living outside the country. So that doesn't seem to be a problem for them. And yet when people come to the country, all of a
they're
sudden...
expats. They're expats as opposed to illegals. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think also one thing that is typically misrepresented, there's a lot of conversation right now about asylum in Europe, and it is giving rise to the far right because these fears are stoked. But the solution is pretty obvious at the same time. And, we've seen it actually in effect because people have been coming to Southern Europe increasingly for the last 10 years. And it's not a problem. Actually, when you look at it, it's like there are jobs that are being filled that were not filled earlier. People are assimilating. Crime hasn't gone up despite, people making a lot of hay out of a couple individual crimes. In gross numbers, crimes have not gone up. And so, we don't have to look far for an example of it working. It's already working, actually. Immigrants are boosting the Italian economy. So, we don't need to imagine some future way that we can actually help people settle in. They are already settling in. Of course, they would settle in probably a lot more smoothly. And here we could maybe transition to places like New York or Chicago if they were not scapegoated, marginalized, if they were given work permits more quickly. And even when they're not, they figure things out and things are kind of pretty fine. Actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've talked on this program about how, in fact, increasing the precarity of the living situations for people who are here in an undocumented status gives employers more leverage over those workers, because if they step out of line, there's a threat, and they can also they're also forced to accept lower wages. So can you speak about how border closure and militancy is a way to kind of build exploitative machinery to a degree?
Right. I think the best way to think of it is the border acts as sort of like a fiscal fulcrum. It is the sort of centerpiece by which corporations can exploit differentials in wages, in worker protections, in unionization rates. And I currently in Arizona, I go down to northern Mexico pretty frequently for reporting and for, whatever, because I can cross the border at ease. And there are a lot of factories that are effectively modern day sweatshops. They're called maquiladoras, or maquilas for short. And the only reason that they exist is because of the border and the way that the border is able to keep or lock a certain number of people in place in northern Mexico and use their labor to produce stuff that we want to buy or that we want to sell in the United States. And, we saw the rise of this in, probably listeners are already sort of connecting the dots to NAFTA. This is when we really saw the border exploited in this way, when we decided to open up for free trade, most of North America, and yet further lockdown, because what happened in lockstep with the opening of NAFTA was further border militarization. I mean, at the exact same time, Congress was passing laws and starting to build what we now see as the incipient wall infrastructure that we're seeing along the border. So if people were able to move freely, if people were able to go where they were able to make higher wages, we wouldn't be able to exploit them. And Justin Akers-Chacon, who does great work on all this issue, he has a recent good book called The Border Crossed Us. He actually counted the number of free trade agreements that have any provisions for the free movement of labor. So right now, there's about 400 free trade agreements throughout the world. That's tracked by the World Trade Organization. And only 40 of those, as of a couple of years ago, had any provisions for the free movement of labor. And those were for only highly specialized fields. So what it comes down to is that the stuff that we buy and the money that is used to buy it has far more rights than a lot of the people that used to make it. I mean, I think like when you look at just actually what's happening along the northern border, the northern Mexican borders, like shouldn't people have the same rights as your toaster oven, as your television that they're building, that can go back and forth and actually sometimes do multiple times in their production, and that people can't? You know, it seems like obviously not only fundamentally unfair, but fundamentally exploitative.
Well, absolutely. And you can also draw a line as well to the decline in union density in the United States to this push for free trade, which is what these borders enable. And just the fact that the TPP, which was widely criticized, obviously, and Obama ended up having to walk away from it, and Hillary Clinton as a candidate too, was the fact that it created these essentially outside tribunals where if a government was going to create a regulation that would impose corporate profits, corporations had the ability to go kind of over that and have a tribunal to determine whether or not this was a regulation that made sense. So it's not just that our free trade deals put our workers at such a lower class too, but it also elevated corporations over the power of states. At least in theory, it didn't end up happening. But I always am in awe of the fact that was a almost happened, honestly.
Well, I mean, it is also happening. I mean, there's a dispute settlement court where parties, including corporations, can bring countries to suit if they don't let them basically implement or let them have free reign and do what they will. There's a recent article about this in the Intercept, that a bunch of like the Bitcoin bros are taking Honduras to court because they're not allowed to operate there.
Yeah, we interviewed someone on that, right?
Yeah. One other point to make here is, I grew up in sort of like suburban Ohio, and a lot of the factories where like my friends' dads worked or like my uncles worked are now closed, and those closures followed on the heels of NAFTA, and a lot of those jobs went to northern Mexico. And there's one place in particular that just like is, I think, such an affront to those people. Is there's a former the place of a former huge steel factory outside of Cleveland that has been rebranded the Steel Yard, and there's like a giant Target and like Ross shoes and like all these things selling stuff that is made outside of the United States, where workers in the United States used to actually make this stuff. So like a lot of the people complaining about the border and supposed invasion or whatever, and the people coming to take jobs, those people lost their jobs because of bordering, actually. Bordering is not good for jobs actually anywhere, but particularly in places where there's been decently paid manufacturing jobs.
So let's just, as we kind of wrap up here, talk about what an alternative vision really is. I mean, you touched on it, but how our Border Patrol agents really, a lot of what they're doing is processing people, right? I mean, they're responsible for turning them away, which is a violation of international law and asylum protections, but they're turning people away, but they're dealing with, like, in the same way when you're going through an airport and you're dealing with somebody, if you're flying internationally, it's kind of like that, right? The fact that the Democrats right now aren't putting forward some sort of updated processing system for people so they can go through kind of a system of going to a court and saying, this is my case, and this is why I would like to live here. I mean, I would hope to move beyond that, but that also just seems like a clearly common sense way to deal with this, to modernize our processing. But instead, both parties seem to be moving towards more guns for the people doing the initial processing at the border. Just speak a bit about that insanity.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, the majority of Border Patrol work right now is saying hi to families, basically, or saying hi to people who have crossed and who are very willingly and like sometimes desperately wanting to turn themselves over into their custody. And, Border Patrol has recognized this, and they actually started hiring non-law enforcement trained officers to help with some of this processing. But the numbers just of people coming are higher than the current capacity is able to deal with. The solutions that have been proffered so far, as you say, are not going to help. It would be more wall, more surveillance technology, and they have plenty of that already. And it, is in many ways as ineffective as actual like steel infrastructure. And then the other recent proposal that has been championed by Biden, who, promised during the campaign, even in the early days of his administration, to restore asylum, has been the other proper solution would be to incredibly increase the threshold for gaining asylum. So in numbers, when you look at it, actually, and so it's kind of funny that they break this down by numbers, but this is, what they've had to do. Currently, you have to prove that you have about a 10% or higher chance of being persecuted or killed or tortured when you go back to your home country. They want to raise that to 50%. That's a really big change. And that also flies in the face of international and obviously current U.S. law, which is what they're proposing to change. But what that would do is just imperil tens of thousands, rather hundreds of thousands of people, because it's already very hard to get asylum in the United States. The rates have fluctuated more, like a little bit over the past years, but really they've held steady, and most of the people are turned away, especially people from countries that we're friendly with. Like the asylum grant rate for people from Mexico right now is still under 10%. Most of the people cannot get asylum. And what we have in place here, this is something I think is also frequently overlooked. We have current policies on the books. They're not laws, they couldn't pass anything, that deny asylum to people who present outside of ports of entry, these people who are turning themselves into Border Patrol. So they're not eligible for asylum. Their first court dates is usually a couple years down the road. They're eligible for a couple protection statuses that are less protective than asylum, and they're withholding of removal or CAT. Sort of technical terms, but a really key point here is that this makes those forms of protection do not lead to any path to citizenship. There's no way that these people who are coming now, who are seeking asylum, but are going to be denied it because of these new procedures, are going to be permanent residents of the United States. So we're literally creating a two-tier system right now. These people cannot finally regularize, which is like the term of art, and become citizens. They're going to be stuck in this sort of half membership zone forever. It's like, again, like, who wants to live in a society where there's literally tiers of residents again? And yet this is what these policies are creating, and the proposal would even enhance that. So it's just like, I think we have it turned around completely backwards. Last point I say, because I know I'm sort of like throwing out a bunch of terms here, it's like, it seems complicated, and the way that we currently have it structured, it is complicated. I mean, asylum law, immigration law, there's thousands and thousands of pages that are currently on the books. But when you really think about it, and this is another sort of point I want to make in the book, and you step back a little bit, it's actually not that complicated. I think all of that legalese is really serves sort of as a smokescreen to defend this multi-agency, extremely expensive effort to keep people out. But really, like, people, find a way to come. If we let them, they'll, have equal rights, and they'll work, and they'll be fine. And like, I think it's kind of actually simple, but we've like bent over backwards to make it difficult to try to keep people out. And we're failing at it.
Well, the book is excellent, and I really encourage people to check it out. It's called The Case for Open Borders. John Washington, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about the conflict in Congo with our guest, Christoph Vogel. We are back, and we are joined now by Christoph Vogel, author of Conflict Minerals Incorporated, War, Profit, and White Saviourism in Eastern Congo, award-winning researcher of Central Africa, research director at the Insecure Livelihoods Project at Ghent University. Christoph, thanks so much for coming on the program today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, I've been reading some of what you've written, and it's striking how different your work is versus what I normally read in Western coverage of violence in the Congo, which is often filled with a lot of vague language, a fallback on kind of a tendency to view it as an ethnic conflict or a conflict over resources. Gangs are discussed without context of how they place in society. And, I guess as an academic who's studied this and who's done so much field work in Congo for many years, what are the gaps that the Western coverage of this is showing? And what is really kind of the reality, if you could fill in that basically information dead zone for our audience?
Well, so I think in general there's a long-standing problem in the way that the rest of the world, especially the Western world, has been sort of trying to make sense of a place like Congo, and that starts long ago. If you go back to sort of colonial newspapers, in which some of the still dominant stereotypes about the Congo have been sort of nourished and created since a long time. You see that actually much of Western reporting and Western narratives that exist about that place in the world tells us at the end much more about these observers than about the Congo itself. And that then sort of can be articulated in a number of tropes. So there is sort of a predominant pattern of depoliticizing conflicts, not just in the Congo, but also in other sort of remote or so-called peripheral places in the world. And that pattern of depoliticizing things is quite manifest in some of the classic narratives about why wars have started and keep going on in a place like Eastern Congo. And that is often linked then to stereotypes about so-called ethnic tensions. Now, they do exist, and they sometimes sort of flare up in more spectacular ways, in some moments more than in others. But one thing where sort of much of the international reporting tends to be a little bit lazy and sort of bent on shortcuts rather than analysis is that very often as violence plays out perhaps along ethnic lines, it is deep-seated political issues, political tensions, political fights and conflicts that are then sort of erupting in violence, and where then sort of belonging, identity, and other questions are basically being mobilized in order to sort of promote certain political agendas.
So it's often the depoliticization, I think you see this as well in the coverage of the Middle East, and a removal of rationality or of like a kind of power analysis that makes sense, where you can fall back on, well, these are just tribes, this is intra-warfare, or this is terrorism, as opposed to the same analysis that would be applied to like a Western government. You don't necessarily see that very often. And you know, about the resources and how resource rich Congo is. I know you wrote a book about this. What is the reality of the exploitation of those resources as it relates to the multi-decade conflict in Congo and the recent uptick in very severe violence over the past few months?
So yeah, that's adding to sort of the ethnic trope. The resource trope is a second kind of very popular and initially sort of Western inspired lens to see conflict. Now that trope is still very powerful, especially now as the flashlights are again on Eastern Congo, as conflicts have intensified over the past months and years. There's somehow a revival of this idea that everything in this war would be motivated by resources, which is historically untrue. So I always like to sort of go back to two more sort of ancient examples. So we see that some of the first cases of massive cross-border mineral smuggling, in that case gold, came up in the 1970s when basically some of the communities and also trading networks that were operating around a series of rich gold mines in the East just decided that given all the red tape and also sort of encroachment of the central government, it would be much more interesting for them to start exporting via Uganda, from where the gold would then end up in all sorts of places in the world. So that is sort of to highlight that the smuggling itself, or sort of the illegal, informal forms of trade, doesn't necessitate the use of armed violence in order to function. Rather, as some recent research that Congolese colleagues and I did a couple of years ago, if you talk to sort of all these magnates in the unofficial gold trade, they will tell you that it's actually much harder to sort of organize some lucrative smuggling deals when there is violence and shooting all around. The second moment in time is if we look back to the start of the actual wars, which is roughly around 93, 94, when there was already a number of violent conflicts on a more local level on the Congolese, or what was then the Zairian side of the border, that sort of got merged with the impact of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda 94, when the perpetrators flew into Eastern Congo, and some of them still remain today in Eastern Congo. At that point, none of the belligerents relied on natural resources to finance their war. That all came 5 years, which is a very long period, into sort of more or less intense conflicts.
And so you mentioned that period and the 90s, I guess, as a time where I believe that was when, and maybe you're definitely someone who could answer this for me. When did Zaire become the DRC? What year was that?
So that was in 1997, after a roughly 1.5 years war, in which a rebellion called the AFDL that was led by Laurent Désiré Kabila managed to topple Mobutu with the support of a large number of neighboring governments.
And Mobutu, if you could explain his role as a bit of a butler for the West. I mean, I know he was supportive of apartheid South Africa as well. What was Western involvement in Congo leading up to that point?
So in order to answer that question, we need to definitely go back to Patrice Lumumba, who was the Congo's the first prime minister of the independent Congo after decolonization in 1960. And Patrice Lumumba had only spent a couple of months being the prime minister, but had quite a massive impact on sort of the history of politics in the country until today, especially given the fact that he was killed with active support of American, Belgian, and perhaps other Western intelligence services, and also with the support of Mobutu, who was back then one of his close aides and previously a high-ranking military officer. And Mobutu was the sort of the strong man in waiting that was ready to sort of take over power across all of Congo back then and keep it for 32 years, in which he sort of established this mutually beneficial relationship of him getting quite strong political backing, especially from the US as well as France and a number of other countries, in response precisely to sort of serving as a bit of a Western liberal pillar against most notably those countries that had closer ties to the Soviet Union back then. So, for instance, Mobutu hosted Angolan, West-leaning Angolan rebels that were fighting a war in the 70s and 80s against the Angolan government.
So, understood there. So essentially he positioned himself as an anti-communist, and that won a bit of the favor of the West. Did he also open up avenues for even further colonial exploitation?
That's a bit more complicated to to judge upon. So Mobutu had this very intriguing governance technique, perhaps, that he sort of would rely on a broadly very anti-colonial Pan-Africanist rhetoric, and he also nationalized in the early 70s, as the country was renamed Zaire. He nationalized a large list of sort of previously colonially owned corporations and companies, in order to create parastatal outfits, including Congo's most important mining company, which is called GECAMIN, which is a bit sort of the offspring of what used to be sort of the main Belgian colonial mining company. But then he also sort of engaged in a sort of joint venture-like approach to sort of together with foreign investors to exploit notably the big mineral reserves in terms of copper and other substances in the southern parts, where also the uranium that was used for the nuclear bombings in Japan originally came from.
And so from that point on, you meant the Rwandan genocide happened, of course, in the 90s. What did that do to the region and the political reality within Congo as well?
So in a nutshell, it basically led to 3 decades and going of more or less intense wars, insecurity, displacement, and fighting. People often sort of split this sort of whole history of violent breakdown since the early 90s into three periods. The first war that we spoke about that toppled Mobutu in 97, and then from 98 to 2003 there was, well, it was always kind of a concoction of numerous conflicts, where also localized conflicts sort of play into the bigger national or regional fault lines as well. But that period is called the Second Congo War, and that basically started when Laurent Désiré Kabila sent away his previous backers that helped him to topple Mobutu, and that led to a situation where both in Eastern Congo at the local level, different armed groups and militias would rally either the government or a new rebel group that was backed again by a number of neighboring countries, while other countries in the region were also backing the central government under Kabila. Now that war had its official formal end after a series of national and international peace negotiations around 2003, when Laurent Kabila had already been assassinated a couple of years ago, and his son Joseph Kabila had taken over the presidency. And so under Joseph Kabila, there was sort of a reunification of a country that was for several years split de facto between different rebel movements and their respective backers. And then we see the creation of a new national army in 2004, and a number of different political processes, most notably the organization of the country's first democratic election in 2006. However, despite the fact that sort of the broader regional tensions have ebbed down a little bit after that period, we also see, owing to the integration of most of the former rebel movements into the national army with their respective claims and grievances, we see a very unstable political and security environment that has always led, then again, certain actors to sort of defect and then create new rebel organizations that would again try to challenge the central power, such as the CNDP rebellion between 2005 and 2008, or then more recently the M23 rebellion that had its first stint from 2012 and 13 and returned to the battlefield in 2021. And all of this happened in a context where you've had consistently dozens, if not up to 100 other different armed groups spread all across the eastern part with their respective agendas and objectives, sometimes collaborating with central government forces, sometimes not, but equally contributing to a record number of internally displaced people that has reached, according to the UN, up to 7 million as we speak.
And so I guess that does bring us to the present day. You talked about those millions displaced. How many have died, and what are the kind of groups that are at the forefront of driving some of this instability?
So there is intense speculation, if not polemic, about specific counts of victims. There have been a couple of efforts to extrapolate more or less reliable numbers. As a proper sort of forensic count is nearly impossible, especially over space and time. One of the most famous numbers that came out fairly early after the Second Congo War was that up to 6 million people might have died from the wars. Now that was seen, especially also in sort of more simplified takes, as if different rebel movements, gangs, and armies would have literally killed 6 million people, which is not true, because that figure sort of also counts secondary victims, which are very probably much higher number than actual battlefield victims. And you have to imagine that in a sense that where there is recurrent fighting, people are getting displaced. Many people, sometimes even displaced people, get further displaced a second, a third, or a fourth time. And that happens amidst a situation where insecurity, violence, but also bad governance, corruption, and interference of different conflict parties lead to a situation where a healthcare system, which is already in normal times struggling to sort of provide sufficient services to the population, gets completely destroyed. The agricultural sector is suffering enormously from displacement, where a majority of basically farming people just cannot attend to their harvest anymore as they get displaced. And so you've got got all ingredients to sort of lead to what maybe medical professionals would call unnatural or untimely cases of death, and to sort of number all of these indirect victims is a task that sort of is scientifically extremely difficult, but then again is a question that is often picked up in very polemic and partisan debates, where supporters of different of the conflict parties involved keep accusing each other of inflating or reducing numbers, and that leading also to a much more polarized invective that sort of accompanies the actual fighting on social media as well as traditional media.
And so I guess that kind of brings us full circle to some of the root causes of what we're seeing as well. And the obviously the history of colonialism and the role of mining in this conflict. I know that you spoke about how it's basically a Western trope, essentially, how to reduce it to a war over resources. But there is something notable that I saw in your writing, how I'll see in, say, like a CNN article about this, where it's referred to illegal mining within Congo versus informal mining, and how that's referred to there. What is the role of mining in this conflict, I guess, not in the sense of a war over resources, but how the industry plays into it within Eastern Congo's economy specifically?
So mining obviously has a quite important role alongside and in the conflicts, and as much as the role of resources, or the plunder or the violent accumulation of resources, has been sort of wrongly elevated into sort of the main or only driver of conflict, you do see that natural resources are very important. They're important in discourse. So Congolese discourse, whether it's parts of the population, whether it's the government, thrives enormously on the supposed theft of Congolese minerals by neighboring countries or by rebel groups, and there is of course also a sort of a broader economy in the Congo, where different forms of mining, so different substances, different technical forms of industrial or artisanal mining, are enormously important for the national economy as much as for livelihoods. Cobalt and copper remain the country's biggest exports, although those minerals are not being mined in the conflict area, and in that context we see much more problems of grant corruption with multinational corporations cutting shady deals with national mining elites, as well as very obvious labor safety and ecological issues. Now, if we go sort of a bit more a very nitty-gritty local level and back to sort of the eastern provinces that are most affected by conflict, there is other minerals being mined primarily, which are, for instance, coltan, tin, and tungsten. And those minerals are mainly mined artisanally. So that means artisanal mining is a labor-intensive activity. And the sort of the boom of those mines has been, on the one side, pushed by international demand for certain rare minerals. On the other side, it's also been favored precisely by war-induced displacement, since artisanal mining is a fairly unskilled, a fairly mobile activity. It has a number of, and very similar to recruitment into armed groups, that is equally a form of mobile labor for a lot of the younger population. So that has sort of led to a perfect storm that turned artisanal mining into both a key civilian livelihood as well as a potential resource for conflict actors to prey upon. Now, and here's where the sort of depoliticization comes in again. Many of these sort of early 2000s Western advocacy organizations that singled out mining as the root cause for violence and conflict in Eastern Congo didn't really sort of allow an image where basically different actors in Congo are fighting out a number of deep political historical issues, but they basically saw that some of them went into mining and made quick cash through mining, and so they thought it's all about minerals. Now, what we see in the last years, and having a closer look at a number of the different rebel groups and factions fighting, we see that those based out of an area where there is just a couple of juicy mines nearby will, if it is practical and easy for them, obviously rely on income or revenue from mining in order to finance their war effort. But then we have a number of other groups that rely on completely different types of resources. And one interesting example is the Congolese army itself. While it has been involved in militarized forms of mining over time, it still has the most pervasive economic impact in terms of the sort of system of hundreds and hundreds of roadblocks and checkpoints that it operates through the country, where it's taxing movement of people, movement of goods, and so do many other armed groups as well. So it is in the end not about necessarily just this easy idea of African people being merely greedy and having no political thought, no political agenda of their own. It is much more a story where you look at fairly pragmatic actors that will be trying to advance their agendas with the means and strategies that are at hand, and that questions also sort of more largely our Western view of allowing in the way we analyze things only one type of rationality, which is the one that we decide to sort of read in the actions of others, rather than sort of understanding, developing sort of the same fine-grained understanding that we like to apply when analyzing our own politics.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Christoph Vogel. You can read his book, Conflict Minerals Incorporated, War, Profit, and White Saviourism in Eastern Congo. Thanks so much for your time today and helping unpack this for us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, with that, we're going to be close to the first hour wrapping up here, but we have a call really quickly. I just wanted to make sure that we got this in for the podcast audience. Chris, are you there?
I am here.
Hey, Chris. This is Chris Albrecht. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, if you don't mind?
My name is Chris Albright. I am a resident of East Palestine, and I'm here to talk to you guys.
So, Chris, just give us an update on the health situation there for the people who have been victimized, who are feeling the effects of that massive spill last year of toxic chemicals.
Well, right now, what we're doing right now is we are working with a newly formed Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers Coalition. We're having a rally this Saturday. A lot of union people are coming here, scientists, media people, everything. We're going to try to come together and demand that our government and our president declare this a national disaster area and enact, one of a number of things that he has to do to give us health care. A lot of people in this town are sick because of the derailment, and we need to have health care.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that people in East Palestine are experiencing?
There's a multitude of symptoms people have had. My family alone has suffered nosebleeds, headaches, rashes, high blood pressure. Myself, I have developed congestive heart failure, which turned into severe heart failure. I've been unable to work since April. I know people in town have developed a lot of different things, that are affecting them and still affecting them. And nobody's getting any better, and we're not getting any help from anybody right now. Not the EPA, not our government, not our president.
And how about your senator? What is Sherrod Brown doing about it, or J.D. Vance for that matter?
Honestly, unfortunately, not a whole lot. I know that Vance has tried to put a little bit of pressure on. Our goal of having this event on Saturday is to really put President Biden's feet to the coals. We want to really implore on him the fact that we need health care. A lot of people in this town, even our local senators and governors in this state haven't done enough yet.
And what are you asking? What's your central demand outside of healthcare, of course? But what can people expect that you're going to be rallying around on Saturday?
Well, first and foremost will be healthcare. That is number one. Number two is going to be railroad safety. This accident that happened here back in February should have never happened. This was something that was preventable, something that can happen anywhere, and nothing has been done about it yet. So we are definitely going after, again, first and foremost, healthcare, because there are people here who are sick and we need it. And the second thing is definitely going to be railroad safety. We have to get safer railroads. We need the railroads in this country. We have to move transport goods and everything throughout the country, but you have to do it safely.
Better staffing, less long trains.
Absolutely. Lower speed limits.
Totally. We've covered better brake systems. We covered this at the time. I mean, the rail companies are essentially trying to staff the trains with as few people as possible to save on labor costs, and then also making the trains as long as possible so that they can transport as much in one trip with as few amount of people manning the trains.
Absolutely, and that's not how it should be done. This is something that you can't sacrifice safety over profit. Which, of course, in the business world, that's what you want to do. You want profit. I get that. But when you're sacrificing safety and you're putting towns and people at risk, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You have to make trains shorter. Having more people on the trains. I heard the other day that they're laying off maintenance workers. You're kidding me. You're going to lay off maintenance workers? The people who take care of the trains?
Right.
You can't do that. You have to have safe railways.
So, what can people do to support you guys, Chris? And how and where is the rally, the get together on Saturday?
The different ways you can support. We do have a webpage. We have Facebook pages. It is Justice for East Palestine Residents and Workers. You can go over there. There's all kinds of links on there on ways you can help. The rally will be held at the East Palestine Country Club this Saturday from 12 to 5. And again, we are going to have scientists, environmentalists,
No, it's okay.
people. We're going to have residents of East Palestine. We're going to have media. We're going to have all kinds of things, food, song, art, anything we can do. If anybody would like to attend, it'll be at the East Palestine Country Club. But yeah, if you go on to, like I said, there are Facebook pages, there are websites, everything dedicated to this. Anybody is more than welcome to check it out and also to stop by, speak their mind, let everybody know what's going on and how they feel about it.
Well, Chris, we'll put a link to those resources in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much for letting us know about this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Well, with that, hope people, if you're in Ohio and you're near East Palestine and you have the opportunity to go show support, I would highly, highly encourage it. The federal government has to do more. It's inexcusable that the Biden administration hasn't done more on this. So thanks to Chris and the other organizers there. I know that also Maximilian Alvarez as well is involved in this. So good job to the people of East Palestine and others trying to stand up for their community. We're going to head into the fun half shortly. The number is 646-257-3920. We're actually already in the phones because we just took a call, so you can come in and we'll take your calls in the fun half. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, there's a weird error going on. Left Reckoning.
Do you need?
Sorry. Yeah.
All right. So I'll ESPN. Check out Left Reckoning. They're back. David Griscom is back as well from his honeymoon, and then for ESPN. We spoke about March Madness. We talked a bit about the NFL shakeups and free agency, all that good stuff. Saquon leaving, Kirk Cousins leaving, Justin Fields to Pittsburgh, Russell Wilson to Pittsburgh. Really fun stuff, interesting stuff. YouTube.com/ESPN show. And now we are joined by Matt Binder and Brandon Sutton. First, though, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning. I'm still struggling to remember what we did on Tuesday. Tommy Shajan, Haiti, really good 40-minute conversation on Haiti, getting into deep, actually a similar sort of thing where we demystify a little, like, it's gangs.
Yeah.
They can't do democracy because there's gangs there. Oh, well, that's convenient. Good thing we can install some more figureheads so Haynes can make some cheap textiles. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, where we got into a little Patrick Bet David catch-up session with Griscom back from his honeymoon. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Hey, guys.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing well. Brandon, can we hear you?
Oh, sorry. I had myself muted.
There we go. Good. I'm glad I caught that. What's happening on the discourse?
I don't know yet, but I will let you know.
Okay, great. All right, let us all know by meaning like when the episode comes out, everyone will know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. I like the way you roll. Binder, what's happening on your shows and your universe?
Sure. So last night on Doomed, I had Lance of the Surfs on the show to talk about the recent alleged unmasking of far-right webcomic creator and sort of like, internet celebrity Stone Toss. This is a guy who's created openly fascist, openly neo-Nazi, racist, anti-Semitic, sexist, you name it, webcomics, and has been cited in manifestos from mass shooters. So apparently he was unmasked. His real identity was unveiled in a very deep investigation by an activist group, Anonymous Collective, Anonymous Comrade Collective, excuse me. And when everyone started talking about it, of course, Elon Musk jumped into action to protect Stone Toss and suspend anyone who posted his name. So we dived into that, talked about it, and you can check that out at youtube.com/Matt Binder. And if you don't get enough of Matt Binder and Lance of the Serfs after that, tonight, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, the two of us will be on Leftist Mafia, as we are every Thursday night, along with the Humanist Report, Rational National, and Rebecca Azor.
Awesome. All right, guys. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomiki.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is this?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello? Is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single frickin' day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go smell it.
Who libertarians?
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35-501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
654 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
We're back. We are back, folks. We are in the phones, and we are reading your IMs, and I will do that right now. Number 13 says Johnson is inviting Netanyahu to Congress. Is that true? I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, they did it with Obama. Why would they not do it with Biden? Not entirely 100% supporting the genocide.
Will Fetterman ask to pretty please be allowed into this one too?
He's going to ride in on Fetterman, who has a saddle on his back.
and the oat thing connected to his face.
Exactly. Big dumb genocidal elephant.
I hope he unretires the big like cartoon bomb that he used at that like one UN hearing, talking about Iran's like nuclear capabilities. Netanyahu, I mean, that was like one of my favorite Netanyahu moments. He had like a big Wile E. Coyote bomb.
I like that too. I like that too. His PowerPoint presentation of all of the evidence that we had that Iran was actually building a bomb. Bad Hasbro. Not says, I watched a really good documentary on eugenics, and the talking points blew me away because it is just being repeated not only by the right, by some of the left regarding homelessness and